Most people think lifting a box is what loads the spine the most. But what if it's actually the muscles that attach to your spine that create the significant compression force more than anything you lift? Working in spinal rehabilitation, I see this all the time, and it's not commonly understood in terms of the compressive load that comes from the muscles, and they actually create way more force than anything you can lift externally. And this is super important when it comes to pain, injury, and also performance. Plus, I'm going to give you a real-world demonstration as to what we saw with a patient to explain this concept. So let's dive in. So a lot of people think that spinal loads only occur when you're lifting something. So you're lifting a box, carrying a bag, etc. And that's what we call external compression. What people don't understand or appreciate is the internal compressive load that comes from the muscles actually contracting. So, for example, if I'm going to lift this 5 kg weight here and I'm doing a bicep curl, right? That's 5 kgs of external load, but my bicep muscle is having to contract to resist against that force, right? So when I'm holding that, the external load comes from 5 kgs. The internal load or force comes from the bicep muscle, which is again holding that joint. Now, when we're dealing with the elbow, because it's a hinge joint, we're looking at 1/15 the force. So what I mean by that is, if you're carrying a 5 kg, you've got to create 15 times that force to resist against you. So we end up creating 75 kgs from the bicep. So what ends up happening in the joint? Well, you get 5 kgs there, and then you're 75 from here, and that's a huge amount of compressive load on the elbow. Now, when it comes to the spine, where the compressive load comes from is the muscles, which obviously attach to the spine itself, and they stabilize the spine. When they contract, they end up compressing that spine. And that's where the internal compressive load comes from with the spinal muscles. The interesting thing is that we need a sufficient amount of muscle contraction to stabilize a joint, but too much can actually add more compressive load than that joint can tolerate, and that's where you can lead to pain and symptoms. Now, the fascinating thing is the research that's been done around exercise and movements found that some lighter exercises that seem like they don't have a lot of load on the spine because they don't have any external weight can actually create a significant amount of compression in the spine. Let me show you what we mean by those. So these are some of the common exercises that a lot of patients report doing before they see us because they're trying to strengthen their core, right? And we've got the sit-up and the Superman, for example. And because there's no external weight, they're not holding anything, any external weight or a kettlebell dumbbell, they think that these are relatively low load and therefore safe for the spine. The interesting thing is that research has actually been done around exercises to understand the compressive cost that comes from internal compressive load, again, the muscles contracting. Now, for a sit-up, for example, during those studies, what they found is that for one sit-up, it's the equivalent of 3,400 newtons of compressive load on the spine, right? And that's equivalent to roughly 340 kgs of compressive load on the spine. And that's without holding anything else externally. And that comes from the muscles contracting plus the movement of the spine. And that's why it's a very significant amount of load. Even more so is the Superman exercise, where you lie face down, you're lifting your arms, your legs, and you're holding. With that, the research has shown that it actually creates 6,000 newtons of compressive load in the spine. So again, equivalent to roughly 600 kgs without any external load. That's a huge amount of compression that's coming through the spine. So, important to understand the internal compressive load. A great example of this is I had a patient in the clinic who was dealing with a back issue. He had a bulge disc issue, and what was happening is that that disc was aggravating his nerve that fed down his leg. Now in his case, when he was just standing upright, not carrying or holding or lifting anything, and he just braced his core, which is pushing toe muscles out, and that activated his spinal muscles, he would actually get his big toe would start to burn, would go on fire. And that's because he aggravated his L5, which is this guy here, his L5 nerve root. But when he just added that amount of compression when he was standing, it was enough to aggravate that nerve and cause sensitivity, right? And if you think about it, just standing and bracing a core, relatively low loads. So they're coming from the internal rather than the external compression on the spine. And it's very, very important to appreciate that. To wrap it all up, when it comes to the spines, whether it be rehab or even training, don't forget about the internal compressive load. Yes, external compressive loads exist and they're important to appreciate, but at the same time, your muscles, when they contract, they impart a significant amount of compressive load in the spine. So make sure you keep aware of that and you understand the cost of what exercise you're doing, whether it be relatively light load or not. It always has a compressive cost in the spine. So make sure you're aware of that, and that's where you can actually get long-term change, but also keep your training very, very effective and minimize the risk for injury.